So welcome to another episode of the Work Ethic Podcast, and I'm sitting here today with my buddy Changa Bell. What's up, Changa?
Hey, what's up, John?
So Changa is the founder and executive director of the Black Male Yoga Initiative, author of Affirmations for Dads, 21 Lessons in Minding Your Fatherhood, actually a host of a recent podcast. You just launched a podcast of your own, Conversations with a Yogi. Be
Yes.
excited to ask you a little bit about that. I listened to a little bit of it today, and on it, he introduces himself in many roles as a student, husband, son, big brother, mentor, dad, leader, host, creator, role model, lover, enemy, cultural activist, writer, and et cetera, et cetera. Says he's a student of life and a servant of humankind.
Mm.
He's been featured on NBC Digital, People Magazine, ABC's Good Morning America, in magazines like The Root, Black Enterprise, and was honored with the Volunteer Service Award under the from the White House under President Barack Obama, right?
Yes.
And so, man, I'm just excited to catch up with you. Why don't you go ahead and just jump in and maybe flesh out your own bio a little bit, other than kind of the highlight reel there, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Shoot, the bios make me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But they're part of doing business. I'm always conflicted about it because humility is like the yogi's number one attribute, and not just that in that role that I play, but like I don't know, I just don't like going around sort of talking about myself. But to my friend, a mentor, a peer mentor of mine, she really taught me. She was accelerating in business, doing really well, and all of her awards were up on the wall, all of her placards, and I was like, she's like, Changa, you got to do the same thing, because some of those things you mentioned, I had them tucked away in a box. Like I just didn't feel like it was necessary because I'm not defined by someone else's critique of who I am or what I do. So that's sort of weird. I think you covered the basis. Like the most important thing I want people to know about me is that I'm dedicated to life and just awakening. I mean, I guess that is the whole definition of being on a path of self-realization, whatever that is. I didn't choose that. It sort of just came into my purview, and then I am running with it, I guess. It doesn't establish me over my fellow human beings. It's just, I do look for people who are awakening, though, because it's a scary and unnerving experience at times, most times. And just having a higher, I won't even say higher because that's judgment too, that's comparison, but just having a high level of awareness, um, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not, a lot of fun.
Well, for those listening, why don't you tell us a little bit about about your work, maybe about the Black Male Yoga Initiative and some of the other things you got your hands in. Just kind of give some introduction to your work as the entity or as the products of your work.
Yeah, well, so the Black Male Yoga Initiative is not exclusionary. It just came about as I wanted to be self-identifying to the Black male community because we were suffering the most in terms of
Mhm.
health inequity. I literally don't go on Facebook. I have a profile there, but I don't go because too many people were dying of like highly preventable disorders or diseases, and that was frustrating. So that's just my role in trying to support the community, but it's open for all people. I often still have mostly females, and it's just something that God planted in my heart, and so I'm just running with it. But it is morphing a little bit, especially with the COVID-19. Everything is coming online. I can't tell you how many Zoom conversations I have now daily, and it's actually been better because the community, as you know, John, with well built bikes, so much of our work has to be cultivating the community, almost stimulating it. Well, now the community got like an electric shock,
Yeah.
where we're all like sort of aware of how connected we are to one another, how much we could be loving one another, and it's a welcomed amount of busyness.
Mm.
To have 3 and 4 Zoom calls a day, as opposed to before, I was trying to get people to engage in a certain way. So, I enjoy it, but it's morphing to online. I have the Universal Training Institute, which I do from the Teachable platform, where I'm going to get into more deeper levels of yoga, like the kleshas and just the scriptures, the sutras, the whole nine, and extending that to organizations like education entities and executives, and just trying to change the culture of what I believe. Capitalism is interesting. Like I enjoy it to a degree, but the stratification that it causes in society, I think there is a myriad of ways that we could approach it, and not even a double bottom line where people try to do social and financial, but just it could just all be different. It just could be community based and really supporting the community. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, because that is exactly what you do with your organization. And that's really what I'm doing. I'm in a high level of uncertainty. My strategy is digital, like a lot of entrepreneurs right now, but that work has to be free at the moment. But I think that's what entrepreneurialism is, which is just, you give from the heart, you try to meet an opening in the market, but you worry about the money later.
Yeah, and I mean, I really appreciated that in the kind of the line, "the servant to humankind," in the intro of your podcast episode. There, I just thought, man, that's such a and like to the point you just made. I think it's such an appropriate posture, right? Is like to give and to serve first, and then to go, yeah, if I am serving well and providing value to my community, probably it will look out for me. Probably I will do all right for myself, or I will make a way for myself. And um, on the question of kind of your own sustainability, I've been watching you on Instagram and other places, and I know this is not exactly like following on topic, but I want to jump into it immediately. So you've been setting up a homestead and kind of your own um, path toward something like sustainability in your own. I mean, you as we were starting off the podcast, you said, "Oh, I got this dog here that might be running around the property. There's all these animals out here." Can you just, man, I'm so excited about the glimpses I've had of that, and I just want to hear all about what you've been working on and what you've seen, what you've learned, and just, I don't know, tell me a little bit about that journey for you and your family.
No, no, I really appreciate that question, because it's personal. I mean, for me, and that's one of the hardest things about doing yoga as a business, because it's so personal to me.
Mm,
I went through a life trial similar to you, where I didn't know if it was like a life or death situation. People wanted to put a pacemaker. Doctors wanted to put a pacemaker in my heart. So yoga is very near and dear to me, and I understand that it doesn't have to be that to everyone. So I had to get away from uh, posing on the internet, telling my yoga story through asana postures, because it doesn't start off to be, but it ends up being viewed as like almost like a competition, like a body competition, a pose competition
mm,
among the yogis. No one says it, and no one actively is. I mean, they do challenges, but if you're doing, I don't know, locust, where you're like resting on your elbows and have your feet up, uh, just why? Why are you doing it? Are you doing it as a display of athleticism, or are you doing it for the deeper meanings for what yoga means to do it, is really to clean your pancreas, your elbows, when they're pushing into your digestive system that way. It's meant to really clean out your intestines, stimulate your pancreas, and get all the bloat out of your belly. And you don't see that in a lot of postures. You see a lot of, like, they'll pick their favorite Emerson quote or something and put it underneath, trying to inspire humanity. And I get that. That's cool. But yoga as a science is meant to be a much deeper, deeper thing. So I stopped the asana practice, and I just figured that modeling, as a teacher, I've been a teacher for a while, not just in yoga, but just professionally. I was a teacher for a while. And I noticed that the teachers that have the most impact are people that walk the walk and talk the talk. So, just modeling.
mm-hmm.
So I started looking into permaculture. My wife had got me interested in permaculture and this sustainable forest. And I said, well, this is an extension of yoga. This is like being preventative in order to sustain yourself through nature and just let the energy of nature take over. So part of that, we have 2 acres here. It's not a lot relative to where we are. We're in Carroll County, Trump country. People have 1,000-acre farms. So when I say 2 acres, it's not that I'm um, saying and not being grateful and saying we don't have a lot, just relative to my quote unquote neighbors. Like people have lots of land to care for. But in this 2 acres trying to make a sustainable forest, part of that was reconditioning the soil.
Hmm.
And once that's done, then the soil will keep it free of pests. So you don't have to do pesticides. It's about creating an overstory and an understory that really creates the environment for health. So one of the ways we had to do that was to get a lot of livestock. So we have 2 goats. We're going to get 2 sheep soon. We have 4 ducks, 18 chickens, 18 land hens, 2 bunnies. The bunny is pregnant now, so we'll have some bunnies. And we have a worm farm. Who am I leaving out? A fish pond, about 40 fish, but all of that is sustainable. So the fish, food for the ducks, the pond services the garden, the compost serves the worms from our dinner table. We put all our food into the compost. They make worm castings. The worm castings end up supporting the soil in the garden, so on and so on. So it's very cyclical. And the goats, they eat poison ivy. They make green manure, so when they defecate, you don't have to you don't have to worry about E. coli like you do with cow manure. It can just go right into the compost bin, and it's just a lot. So it's a lot of learning. Like I said about a student of life, I'm not an expert, and this is me being strategic against. We all sort of campaign and complain about Monsanto and genetically modified food, but then we can take action. It doesn't matter if you have 2 acres or a quarter of an acre or even a 10 by 20 area in your yard. You can sort of make these changes that'll benefit your life on a whole.
Dude, it's so good, man. Well, and there's something seriously deep in that, even as you transition into talking about that from yoga and practice, but also then you go, oh, it's not just that I'm talking about something, but that I'm modeling something. And then you follow that through to like, well, we complain about this or we complain about that in maybe a more political way. So there's like the religious or the political or whatever, but we say a lot of stuff, right?
Mhm.
And then you're going, yeah, but I can embody it. We can take action. Like rather than complaining, we can do. And I heard that from the setup of that to the conclusion of that. There's a way, and then along the way going, and I'm not an expert. I'm a student. I'm figuring this out. But you're figuring it out. It's not academic, but through doing. And I just like, there's so much about the model of that that's just right? Like we got to learn to embody knowledge. And well, one, just to tell you, in case you don't know this or don't remember this, I think so. Permaculture has always been a huge fascination of mine and like something that I've been really into learning from and have been historically maybe more of a practitioner than I maybe have been currently, which is the season of life and really a loss of a property at one point in time where I had so much invested in this piece of land. And then as I transitioned to a new one, was like, I just rebuilt a compost bin like this weekend. So I'm like, all right, we're getting the ball rolling again, but we're back to day one, and that's a hard place to be, but it's part of the ebbs and flows there. And I know, like, I mean, even for me, so I'll just take compost, right? Like I look at compost and like, there's a principle that comes out of permaculture, I believe. People will hear me say a lot, like it's only waste because we waste it. Right. So, and so I think compost is a great example of that, like an apple core. So we go, we throw that in the trash. That has no value. We don't value that thing. But if it's properly valued, if we can have eyes to see the value in that apple core and you put it in its proper place, like a compost bin, it breaks down and produces life, right? It gives nutrient to soil, to future life, and just as you kind of walk through that narrative, it's like something that we consider trash is very valuable. And this lesson to me has been a lesson in even the people I choose to spend my life with, or like I've worked a lot with folks that are on the streets, and in Florida, there's a lot of folks on the streets. And these are people that are often seen as trash, as waste, as remove them from our site. But it's like, if we properly value those people, right, then life can grow out of that. Very similarly to the apple core. It's like a lesson that I learned there. And it reminds me, I've from a more of a Christian tradition, and like maybe this from a Bob Marley song, but the stone that the builders refused has become the head cornerstone. And
Mm-hmm.
from working on a construction site, if I want a stone or a board that the builders refuse, I go look in the trash pile. And it made me think like God is a dumpster diver who's pulling stuff that we waste and building a kingdom. And the kingdom of God, that idea spiritually, is a permanent culture, a culture that is permanent, right? It's something that I've always like thought like this permaculture idea is like a life philosophy that kind of encompasses so much of what our spiritual traditions and maybe our political inklings kind of aim at. And so I like was so excited to see you were working on some of this. And like, I guess in my own reflection on the compost bin, I'm just curious, like from the animals to your family's engagement there, just, I would love to hear of your own like thoughts and reflections. Like, what have you learned from your land? What have you learned from the work of working your own land? Like, talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, man, I love your analogy. That's just deep, and that's why I rock with you. That's what I'm talking about. Just being on I won't say a higher frequency, but just the vibration of seeing life as what it is. Like, it's a vibration with energy. There is no such thing as waste. And homesteading. So homesteading is a little different than permaculture even. So I'm also homesteading. We've named our home not out of any kind of narcissistic tendency, but it's called Bell Valley Homestead. Homesteading does exactly that. You reuse all materials. So I cut this tree yesterday because no, 3 days ago now, my wife was highly upset. She didn't want me to cut it, but the leaves were going into the pond and stagnating and funking up the pond. So I cut it down. I've turned the branches into borders for the garden. I've scooped out some of the larger part of the trunk, and it's going to be my garden for my lettuces. I'm going to put in there, and as the trunk deteriorates, it's going to give nutrients to the lettuce. So just lettuce, this thing of everything having value. So to your point, I've only been doing this since June of last year, so it hasn't even been a complete year. In the beginning, and my body still hasn't adjusted yet. I mean, I'm in deeper pains than I was when I started doing yoga. It's small muscle development.
Time out, real. I just want to reflect. What, like, why? What? Because of the work, or because of
the work, bro?
Yeah.
The work is insane.
Yeah.
Now I see why. There's just, it's not just about scale when we use immigrant workers or even this country's history of slavery. It's about ability and actual manpower. So my body's still, I don't sound like a yogi when I get up from a chair. I'm like, and that's from the plow. I've learned things about my body, like the carpals. Like, I study anatomy as a yoga teacher, but the carpals are so linked to your traps and your rhomboids. My massage therapist was like, "What are you doing?" I couldn't even move my neck after a while, and it was because of so much tilling, plowing, gripping. I'm doing carpentry now. I built this chicken coop that we call a chicken condo.
That's so nice, dude.
That
So
thing's
nice.
insane. So, and to your point, it was very spiritual because even accepting, and our fellow brother Matthew Kincaid and his knowledge on slavery, and I'm borderline sounding like Kanye West when I say this, but our accepting of the narrative of slavery, if we choose to accept it in the context in which it was given to us, because I more or less would rather accept it from the water dancer, like Ta-Nehisi Coates' Water Dancer. I don't know if you had a chance to read it yet, because I know you're a very well-read person, but if you read that, it's told from the slave perspective, so they're human, and it's an endearing story of love and purity. So if you look at the real narrative or an aspect, my guru always says that the truth is multidimensional. So just a more balanced tale. But in the beginning, because I was connecting to the narrative that was handed down through the slave owners, and just tilling my land one day, I cried. I was just, my daughter had, I got a Craftsman tiller. That thing is forward. It can bust up anything. It's like having an earth mover. And it was still so hard. I was like, how did our ancestors do this with a horse and an ox, or just by hand? And even though the property is mortgaged, there's a sense of stewardship always. Even when I own it, I'm never gonna feel like I own it because taxes and just, the power that man has put on this earth is just, and the authority we've given ourselves is interesting. So I look at it as stewardship, and and part of that stewardship makes me feel ownership of my humanity, right? So there's been a big spiritual thing. Even this morning, I touched my 8-year-old daughter on her hand or something. I was showing her the office that I was telling you about right before we started this broadcast, and she said, "Oh, Daddy, what's wrong with your hand?" And I showed it to her because she felt it. My entire hand is calloused. The dirt is a part of my skin now. Like, I've taken showers, washed it 50 times, but from the gardening and handling the earth, I can't get the dirt out. I got calluses on the side of my hands. They're fatter, they're thicker, and you know, the earth reshapes you. So I'm being molded by spirit, and it's nothing. Now I know why the British or we tend to market it as older ladies here being excited about gardening. But man, it's like hugging God, man. It's like giving God a hug every day. Um, and just seeing that there's no real good or bad. It's just life. Kobe Bryant dying is a part of life. It sucks. It hurts, but there's like when I love my ducks. And as soon as they got my pond, I mean, I because of practicing permaculture, I couldn't shoot the crane last year. The crane came down, ate lots of our fish. He ignored the fake crane that was there. He was like, "What is that plastic thing?" You know, he just ate it. So the ducks, we were like, "Oh, they're so cute. They're diving." Man, they were eating the crap out of our fish. And I was like, "Oh yeah, they're not just cute. They eat fish."
Mm.
Um, so it's just teaching me a lot of acceptance, man, about life. And during this pandemic time, it's rough, but it's all of this is life, man. It just makes me appreciate every day because I know that every day really is a gift.
Mm. Man, there's so much in there. So I am curious because as you talked about, like even thinking back on kind of the experience of slavery or migrant workers and like just taking slavery and even like the Black community, or like ways in which it's conceivable and understandable that you go, yeah, I'm not. There's almost like a move that you almost have to. I would imagine you have to overcome something to work a plow, to work land, right? Like there's almost an understandable reluctance to engage maybe in some of those activities among the community. And I'm curious if I'm missing something on that, but then also if like there's a word for you to say, like having going, now I'm fully engaged in this, is saying, and the earth is reshaping me, it's molding me, it's like I'm grateful for this, like connecting those things. So there's a legacy, but like the avoidance of that thing, but then the embrace of that thing. You know what I mean? And like how that's, I don't know, almost like to speak to that a little bit. Is
I,
that a clear enough question?
I don't think you're wrong in that sort of presumption of maybe the Black community is like, nah, I certainly didn't. My ancestors didn't go through all of this, so I'd still have to do it. I think there is maybe an inkling of that in some people. That's sort of what educated does, but that's a class, right? So we have to remember classism, the educated class, and I'm a part of that. So I'm not saying that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. I went to um, colleges, several colleges, and I was getting multiple degrees. I left my PhD program, so but it's a mindset. Um, what what uh, what being out here has taught me is that I had to get over my own bullshit, and even it's a lot of bullshit we have in our cultures and communities. I can't tell you how many loving conversations I've had with folks with MAGA shirts on out here. I can't tell you how many people I've had to have frank conversations with. I can't even go to Lowe's. Lowe's, we spend an hour and a half because we just end up talking to folks. But a guy in there used to do Civil War reenactments for the South. He had a long beard, and I remember talking to him for about 2 hours. He's a Navy vet. It's a fascinating man. 14 kids, married for forever, and he was like, "Well, we should go up and hang everybody up in D.C. Like it's all this. We should lynch him," as we said. And I said, I said, well, when you realize, brother, yeah, I said, you realize, brother, that there's some connotations with that word lynch that aren't very nice. And you know, and he's already reenacts for the South, and he knows his history. He knows his great grandfather was in the Confederate Army, and he said, I don't care. He said, we need to lynch everybody. But at the end of our conversation, we still ended up hugging each other. And that's not to say kumbaya. That's not to say the shit hit the fan, that he wouldn't be sniping me from a distance. But it's those kind of conversations that we need to have in order to
Mm,
rebuild each other. And I have them all the time here. And, you know, so it's part about being an ambassador for humanity. It's not, so I had to get over my own things. I had my own preconceived notions of what it would be like to live out in the county. It's 3% African American here, 6% Latino here, and it's high level, like I said, Trump Pence, which has been associated with a certain racial predisposition, a certain conservatism. But yoga says that ignorance is the source of all suffering,
mm,
right? That's what Yoga Sutra, I think, is book 2, number 3 says. Um, and I believe that. That's part of the kleshas, the afflictions that plague humanity are about this ignorance. And it's not my duty, it's not ego that says let me go out here and combat ignorance. Again, it's just down to when we look at Buddha, Gandhi, maybe not so much Gandhi, and you know, that more the modern people, we know their downfalls. Like we hear that Dr. King was really a sexual deviant. We know that Buddha was beating his wife, and I mean not Buddha, Gandhi's beat his wife and was very much a conservative prior to becoming. But so we get to know their evolution. We don't know about Buddha if he was like a thought. We don't know if Jesus used to visit the parlor. Is that how he met Mary Magdalene? We're not really sure. Uh, but I would guess in their humanity, they had an arc like that too.
mm,
So if we are really to express compassion, you know, and that's not to say not dumb compassion. I'm not gonna put myself in a situation of harm. That part of having that yogic awareness is using that intuition to keep myself and my family safe. But I still have to walk the walk and accept everybody's humanity where they are, and ask them to do the same for me.
mm,
So you know, to take an accurate snapshot, and if they can't, if they're incapable of doing that, then you know that's the level of awakeness that I'm talking about, the level of awareness. And by my own estimation, from the classic texts that I read, I don't think I'm anywhere near being fully awaked or realized, or awakened or realized like Paramahansa Yoganandi or something. But it is something that I hope arrives to me someday. I know that I can't necessarily thirst after it or go after it. The more you do that, the opposite happens. So just putting myself in position to just be express gratitude and live gratitude every day, like you said. So this is it's very humble when you got to sit on your hands and knees in the mud like I did all day yesterday just to make a garden that was about, I don't know, 3 by 4. You know, to dig a hole and have to really know this nectarine tree I planted, to really pray as I did it and do everything right. Cut the roots vertically, dig it to the right depth, put in the manure and the compost beneath it, and wait 2 to 3 years. The thing about farming and all this gardening is that if I'm been farming for 30 years, that means I've only had 30 times to harvest, you know, say corn. Say I was doing maybe not corn because corn you can harvest multiple times, but I don't know, say something uh well, even the spinach, right? It takes 90 days to come to term. So if I've done that, I maybe get 1.5, 2 times in the summer. You know, if I plant at the right time in the spring. So even 30 years in, am I an expert? I've only grown it 30 times.
mm.
There's so much more. So it's just, it's a humility involved in serving yourself. And then it's so much work. I understand why supermarkets were even invented, because there's so much work to feed yourself. But the trade-off is knowing the quality and the naturalness of the food that's coming back. And that ends up being spiritual too, because it's more than just physical food I'm getting. It's the spiritual aspect of like being on my knees and and humble, practicing humility on a daily basis.
Man, so the 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 act of I don't know what I've always thought of as like collaboration with creation, like the like going, man, I get to like setting the stage for that garden or planting seeds is like these are things that are happening. Like they're happening in the forest, right? The leaves are falling, they're composting on the ground, they're creating nutrient soil, but you're both learning like how nature works and then collaborating, kind of co-creating the tomato, co-creating the spinach. Um, but I really like the words you're using of like how, so the humility it takes to kind of engage in that, to learn kind of from the earth, this posture of learning and humility, kind of on your knees in the mud. And then, but what really stood out to me is like the idea of patience. Like I have to wait 30 years, I have to wait 90 days, I have to wait. And there's so much about, I don't know, I guess like when I think about work in general, right? Like as like a term, I often think that work, a lot like sacrifice, like a religious sacrifice, has something to do with like a giving up of something now or a doing something very hard right now for something tomorrow, right? So you're in the garden yesterday getting dirty and working because of what might happen tomorrow, right? Because of what might happen down the road. The world, and I think of like the work we invest our lives in is an investment in tomorrow, in for a future generation or a future me or a future thing. And so as I think about like that, the necessity of us to kind of give ourselves to that work, I'm one it's just an interesting point of reflection for me to just think about like what it is that we invest ourselves in today, for the sake of that. And I guess like planting seeds just seems to be like a fantastic illustration of that. But if you flip that and look backward, then you are the product of a lot that has happened before you, right? You're the fruit of maybe work in earlier years or work of your parents and folks before that. But I'm curious for you in your early life, just think back, and this could be a job or not a job, it doesn't matter. But like as work came to mean something to you as a word in your own life, like what are your earliest memories of work? What are your earliest memories of like, yeah, work?
Yeah, that's a funny thing because I hated work.
Uh
I wanted to be an actor so that I didn't have to work. And I
huh.
wanted to be that at 5 years old, and I was, my dad's a drill sergeant. He's a first sergeant so in the U.S. Army.
Oh wow.
So I would drop him off at 4:30 so he could go sprinkle some spit on people's face as he yelled at them. So work wasn't fun. I'd started as a paper boy, getting up early, delivering papers at 12, and ended up bartending, waiting tables, doing all of this stuff. Uh, but to your point, I wanted to find something. I learned through work that work was something I wanted to do where I didn't even realize I was doing it. So I
Mm,
work 20 times harder now
yeah.
as an entrepreneur, as a servant, than I would if I had a job.
Hmm.
So if I had maybe investment bankers, would work harder, putting in 90 hours a week. But I don't even think so because it doesn't stop. I'm doing 15 hours a day usually. And I love what you said about I love that metaphor about planting seeds, that I am someone else's seed coming to fruition. Because my favorite psalm in the Bible, Psalms 1, and it talks about just being planted by the root of the living water and the fruit coming in due season.
Hmm.
And much in that way. And I'm very, again, humbled by the previous owners of this house. He was
Hmm.
an engineer. He wrestled for Penn State. He had some heart disease and died of dementia. Wonderful man. From the neighbors I hear, he was very to himself. But when I look, he was already practicing permaculture because as I learned,
Really.
and I'm looking at zone 1, 2, 4, I'm like, man, it's already in place. So
Mm,
just again, that ignorance.
mhm,
I got a level of illumination once I started educating myself. Then I saw what was around me. It wasn't all these trees. He had put the forest where it was supposed to be. The garden was where it was supposed to be. The water, the pond's already here. We have solar power and wind power already here.
really.
Yeah, so it was already a part of what we're doing. And again, that biblical passage of just in due season. So it was that season, and I just I love it. So he didn't even get to see. It's an orchard out there that has pear and apple trees and grape vineyards. Um, when you plant stuff like that, it's not for you.
Yeah,
It's
it's
for
years and years to, yep.
yeah, it's years in advance. And so he passed at 83 just last year, and so he was still going, putting things in order for someone.
Mm,
And that what could be more loving than that? And so when I look at the work that you and I are doing, your work reminds me of B. Gaddy in Baltimore, who made it a trend. She didn't make it a trending thing, but it became a trending thing to feed the homeless. It's stratifying, this otherness, right? We make homeless otherly.
mhm,
Um, but she dedicated her whole life to that, and eventually, the public elevated her to Congress woman, or no, she was on city council because of her lifelong dedication to being. I mean, how more human can you be than just say, "Oh, you need a meal"? So she
mhm,
just would cook for people every day and be like, "I want to make sure you live, so here's some food." And yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that's why, in some ways, this pandemic is a blessing because it's making us all look at our lack of humanity. I mean, we have people fighting over toilet paper. When that
mhm.
first came out, again, that's that different kind of consciousness. I was like, well, that's silly. I started ordering more bidets. Like, we have a bidet here. You can squirt a little water up your shooter.
Mhm,
You don't need
mhm,
you can dab, or even just hello everybody, get a washcloth.
mhm,
Use a washcloth, and rinse it out. Use soap, clean it every time, but don't go punch your neighbor or your community member in the face because you want 10 packs of TP. Just the end of world grocery cart. I know I'm not supposed to judge as a yogi, but boy, I was in there judging like, oh, so Oreos before you die, and chips and toilet paper and wipes, and like nobody's thinking about, let me just hold your hand, neighbor. Let's be in prayer. If this is my last moments, let's go down. And I really appreciate my neighbors, man. Beautiful people. Like I said, their kids come over now. His is a firefighter and his wife is a nurse.
Huh.
And so they're right there mixing it up with COVID-19 every day. And our kids play together now, that because our kids are homeschooled, have been homeschooled for 11 years. They're now at home and they come over and play every day. And again, this is uh, what some might think are different values. Like, I know the amount of firearms they have in their house that they shared with me. Woof. you know, and
Sure.
yeah, young boy is only 10 and he's got 3 and can shoot. But I respect the lifestyle and the culture here.
Mhm,
And this the fact that we still let our kids play during this time. um and we take appropriate standards, like no one's like not worried about offending, so we say make sure you wash your hands, don't sneeze, but we're not making the kids not be kids.
mhm,
And we're also looking at more of the facts of what's going on. No one under 9 has got the disease yet. And I shouldn't even call it disease. It's a virus. It's a
mhm,
non-living organism. It's a protein that attaches itself and tries to download its DNA to you, which makes you sick. So it's not even a living organism. So, uh, just again, I keep overusing this word perhaps, but the humility of knowing that I don't know everything would make me always curious. That aspect of mindfulness, childlike curiosity. So when something like this happens and you're told to stay at home, being less reactionary about, no, you're taking my liberty and my freedom, but more like, okay, well, let's look inside and let's see what this is really gonna unearth. Let's see what seed has been planted in me that now gets a chance to blossom. To use your analogy.
yeah, and so kind of sticking with that, what's going on right now with the virus, and I'm curious, like what else you have been seeing. I mean, one, just connecting that with our conversation we kind of merged into this from, was like, even I just wonder how affirming that's been to you. I mean, I know you're probably not growing all of your own food at this point, or I don't know how much of your own food you're growing, but like the beauty, the power really that you were growing in your yard, right? Because ultimately, like when it comes down to people fighting over something in a grocery store, we realize how dependent we are on the trucks that drive food into our communities, because we've so broken relationship with the land and ability to produce the food and whatever, that we're, there's a real affirmation of the work that you're doing in your own production. But I'm just curious, I don't know, just like maybe hot takes on things you've been seeing, like as you've just been watching humanity right now. So maybe not as an act of judgment, as an act of observation, like, oh, this is what I'm seeing. Just this is what I feel like God is teaching me through this, or this is what I feel like is emerging in myself and in the community around me or in my own family. Just as we've been given the gift of pausing to reflect a little bit. I mean, that is the bright side of this, right? It's like there's been a real moment for global reflection right now, and I think a cool opportunity for us to share the wisdom that emerges out of that with one another.
Yeah, I think that's the first principle of permaculture is to observe and interact. And I love that because historically I'm not necessarily a patient person. So the fact that for that first, it's almost been a year. So for this first year, a lot of what I did is when I walk my dog every morning, I walk around the property and I just observe. I look at trees, I look at the light, I feel the wind. It's insane how different the wind is. It's not even a hill. It's just a subtle incline, very subtle incline from the top of the quote unquote orchard where the grapevine is, and about 30 yards down. I can't even call it a slope. You don't even realize you're going down really. But the wind in that valley is so much less because of these windbreakers that we have by the garden than it is at the top of the hill. And what that means in terms of making your plants, the ability for your survival, basically, for your garden survival. So I think it's the same with us, right? Like I've just been, to your point, observing and interacting. So, not trying to preach or teach or wag a finger and say, hey, you're not doing this wrong. And absolutely, I'd be lying if I didn't say that this move wasn't about more power, control, and influence in my own life. So this will be maybe the first, yeah, I can't even say the first year. So my goal is to produce 90% of the food that I intake. Oh, and I did leave off 2 turkeys when we were going through the pets. Because I have 2 meat turkeys, Darwin and Jordan, that we shouldn't have named. Because we're gonna, they're meat turkeys, so they're bred to only live 5 years, and they're gonna get to 50 pounds.
Wow.
So they will be slaughtered, and that's the thing. Everything here is meant to be sustainable and earn money. So yeah, just been observing and not, like I said, not judging, not wagging the finger. Well, except for in the supermarket in the first doomsday baskets, I was definitely judging there. But yeah, just really looking at the reflection, like what happens inside of me as I observe what's happening outside of me.
So what's happening inside of you? What have you learned about yourself watching this play out?
Yeah, just being patient is not only a virtue, but it's like a quality that has to be cultivated. Patience, acceptance of what is really hard. Like my wrestling is a big, I don't know if it's a country culture or whatever, but my son wrestled this year, and watching these kids out here huge for whatever reason, they just arm strapped little kids. But watching my son, who's a pretty big guy for 9, he's only 9, so he played football and wrestled this year. But watching him get choked out on the mat, just like literally face turning red. Me thinking to myself, I'm pretty sure that's an illegal chokehold. Hearing the coach say later, yeah, that wasn't legal. And I'm thinking, like, why'd you let him get choked out then? And, allowing these life lessons to happen, watching him cry every single match. And he ended up being 3rd in sort of the little state travel league champions, and he never wrestled before. But just watching his character build through suffering and and looking at how my own character has been built through. So I've been homeless. Like my son was born when we didn't have a house. He was born on the floor, not breathing, and was breech. And that was only 5 years ago. So every year I celebrate his birthday, I kind of sort of remember like, wow, again, that word humble. Like we were staying in my childhood friend's house, living in his deceased parents' room. And, the baby came out on the living room floor. And, it wasn't a house in disrepair, but it was a house uh, in spiritual disrepair. It looked like it did when I was in third grade because, it's a lot of sadness there. Just wasn't an optimal place. And so it just, what's happening in me is growth or blossoming. I can feel it. I mean, the awareness is like I said in the beginning of our talk, is kind of overwhelming. Like, I'll give you an example. My wife made some vegan chocolate chip cookies last night because I'm allergic to eggs. That's a new thing. So I can't even eat these duck eggs and these chicken eggs that I'm producing. And we produce about 12 eggs a day. Eventually, the 6 pullets will start giving eggs. So we'll probably do 18, 20 eggs a day. And then the ducks, once they start. So I can't even eat that. But anyway, I ate 4 of her cookies and I was up all night I won't say like a crack addict. If I say it, I mean it in the colloquial 80 sense. Like,
Sure.
I don't want to disrespectful to anyone's battle, but I could not go to sleep. And I couldn't go to sleep because my body is that sensitive to caffeine and I have awareness of it. If I have a Coca-Cola, a 12-ounce can, I'll have to go to the hospital. My body freaks out.
Really?
Like a full panic attack. It feels like I'm having a heart attack because of this heightened awareness that came through my yoga practice and through observation. And I think back, I'm like, wow, as a kid, my whole life, I mean, that's what I lived on: Doritos, hot dogs, Coca-Cola. Once I stopped doing that stuff as a part of my yoga journey, the awareness developed in me of, how certain foods react, how certain teas, how certain energy of people and come around. And even with the quarantine, because we've already been sort of isolated and social distance just because of our lifestyle, not on purpose, but homeschooling and homesteading, it wasn't a whole bunch of time to be with other people. And so this has actually brought us closer to folks. Like, look, I'm on a long conversation with you. You're one of my favorite people on the planet. And I feel like if this didn't happen externally, you and I would have probably not made the time. Yeah.
You were on my list, but yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, it has given a lot of opportunity for actual connection. And it's really interesting to think that when people are being more and more isolated, in your situation, you're actually maybe connecting more so because people are moving to this kind of online connection, which has been really cool to see. But yeah, you're right. Like it's funny to think of like your lifestyle was already, I mean, this is funny. A lot of my homeless friends are joking, like social distancing. They're like 6 feet. Well, that's a good first step to warm up to people. Like, you know what I mean? Like because they're like, we're never that close, man. We've been socially distanced completely most of the time or whatever. Yeah, it's been a powerful change in culture to watch that play out. But it's super cool. So your family, I think, I mean, even before this, like being on the land together, this has been a good time for you guys, kind of drawing closer as a family, and then now opening up more opportunity to just connect with others, like through this kind of thing as well. Now you're also, I'm assuming, your conversations with the Yogi. So I want to hear a little bit about that project, but I'm assuming that's also an effort to, I mean, it sounded like you were inviting conversation, questions, like dialogue there, right? So it seems like you're kind of establishing a bit more platform for those kind of connections as well, right? And so you referenced that in the beginning, like we're doing some online trainings, we're getting a podcast up and running. Were those things kind of in the works and then sped up because of what's happening right now? You're like, oh, I guess I got, let's go ahead and launch these things. Tell me a little bit about those projects and what opportunities are there and kind of how they came to be.
Yeah, I mean, you're insightful, man. Your intuition is on fleek. So yeah, absolutely. all those things have been on the list for a long time. And I think I was procrastinating because, when you got to get up and drive into the city, work, teach at a couple schools, like, just the hours being on the road, it was like, I don't know when I'm going to do these things. Because once I do my role as gardener, when I first wake up, got to let the animals out, feed them. Then I go, come be a dad, feed everybody. Then I got to go hit the road, go to work. Then I got to come back. It just was never going to happen.
Yeah.
But with this situation sort of making us all sit at home, I was like, I found a few hours, like, you spend a lot of time doing the outside work, but then when you come in, it's like, oh, I can now start to develop this. So I had a radio show for 3 years on WEAA FM in Baltimore City on public radio, and it was amazing. I mean, they didn't do, because it was public radio, they didn't take ratings and demographic. So I had no idea who I was talking to. It was just sort of a shot in the dark. And it was a really weird thing to like be in a supermarket line, or I gave a speech at Hopkins one day, and a couple of people came up to me and they were like, well, you used to be on the air with Sean Yos, and like people recognizing my voice and then saying like, I really appreciated your viewpoint on this. I really appreciated your understanding of this. And I think, I experienced my life from the inside out, so it feels normal to me. But maybe you get this a lot too, because through our conversations over the years, you don't seem normal to me. You're very, you're very sentient, I think is a way, or just connected. And so I realized that it was a form of ego in myself masking as humility, saying, oh, no, I'm just, no. No, I think I had to accept that about myself, that I'm a little bit strange. I'm a little odd, a little unique. And that may be part of my gift, is what I had to think. So conversations with a yogi, a lot of my ignorance, being Christian, raised Christian, Hinduism and yogic lifestyle, and study Buddhism, and so there's just spiritual aspects. And now even permaculture, I would say, is spiritual. Homesteading is spiritual. Just combining them all together. Again, not to stand on any kind of soapbox and talk to people, but just to say, hey, have you considered this? Like a simple suggestion, like, hey, do you know about a bidet? It's $79 on Amazon. And how somebody, or like, even with us producing eggs, like, you don't save money, you break even. You have to scale up to make money on eggs, because of the feed. Once the food forest, quote unquote, is up and running in permaculture, then you make money, but still not a lot of money. It might be like $50-$70, with the amount of chickens we have. We have 18 chickens. It might make $50 or $70, and that's not to shirk off how important that is. But if you're talking about capitalism, that's why I said it's interesting, and really making a way for your family or yourself, and getting multiple cars, or, being able to take vacation. That's not necessarily going to happen through the level of homesteading we're doing now. So just, learning about, where I really fit in, and sort of letting that be guided as well, and not trying to force my will, but to see, what the inner voice is really saying to do in every aspect of life is just where I'm resting right now.
That's awesome. So you have one episode up of the podcast right now, right?
Yeah. So the one episode is up. I'm going to do it every Wednesday, and thanks for making me circle back to it. Because all these things, they show up as a podcast, but as you can see, they sort of mean so much more to me. So
Yep.
The podcast was a way for me to do what we're doing now. And I think it'll evolve into something like we're doing now, where hopefully people will start to comment or inbox something. And if they feel strongly enough, I'll say, hey, you want to hop on it with me? But for now, it'll just be me sort of expressing my own experiences and opinions, and, seeing if that can be useful to people. And if not,
well, I listened to a bit of it this morning, and it's a super clean sound, and you did a really good job. You're using Anchor, right?
Yeah, I'm using Anchor FM. Yeah.
So one of the cool things about Anchor that you can do, and you've probably already seen this, but for those listening, if they're listening to your podcast, or this one is also hosted on Anchor, you can go on and hit like leave a message. And so you can invite people, like say you ask a question, you can go on and say, go on there, you can do it on your phone, hit leave a message, and they could just record a question or a message or an answer to a question. Like you could literally, if you can get enough people engaged in that, that gives you the audio from those things where you go, oh, we got a question from so-and-so, let's go ahead and listen to it. And then, you know what I mean? But it's a cool, I actually think it's an incredible platform that really,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, dude, it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got to do that.
You just tell people, go on and engage. And for those listening, if you guys want to do the same, just go on, you leave a message, ask a question. So there is a question actually that I've been trying to get people to answer on that thing. So since I just mentioned it, I also try to get everybody that I talk to answer it. So for those listening, go on and answer this question. But for you also, I would love to hear you answer this question. How would you define success?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think success, and I'm not just flipping this around trying to be like a guru to say this. I think success defines me in a way. I don't know, man. I think I look at someone like Kobe Bryant and I say that feels very successful to me. He was a man, I mean, yeah, he was human, so he had a discretion or two, maybe more that we don't even know about, but who cares about that? We all do, including the quote unquote victims. They have pasts and histories too. So, but when I look at it from a standpoint of creating a family, his generativity, he was focused on sort of the financial quote unquote empire, if you will, the ability to, the African proverb of the ability to sustain or think about or create, and also Native Americans have this, for 7 generations ahead. I think that is what I would feel like is success. So and you had mentioned that earlier about the ancestor shoulders that even I'm standing on, I'm a part of their dream. To be more of a, not a linchpin or a critical component, but, I think there's that person in everyone's and family legacy that maybe catapulted them to a different level. And when I say it, I mean it more in a roomy kind of level, not that I'm excluding the financial aspect, because monetary power is always going to be, I shouldn't say always, hopefully it's not always going to be. I really hope that we all evolve past it. But for now, it's going to be a form of stability and energy to use. But it's still secondary in the culture that I have here. But I would say the success is, for me, is the ability to contribute significantly to those 7 generations ahead, that they could look back 7 generations from now and be like, man, I'm so glad that great grandpa Changa put it down this way and has our family, had our family started to focus on metaphysics and spirituality, because this is important. So I'm glad he was thinking that far. He was thinking about us then, and we're okay now.
There's a lot of ways in which you can do that, like with the land, right, and the seeds you sow today and the work you sow today. But one of the things that I don't think that we in our time recognize enough is that what you're doing right now. So there's a lot that you reflect on. There's a lot that you have to offer. There's a lot that you share with people that listen to you right now. But with your podcast, with doing this with me, with recording conversations right now, the great grandkids, I really fully believe that this will be available to them, that they will be able to look you up, which, can you imagine being able to look 7 generations back to your great, you know what I mean? Like, and go, incredible. What do they have to say about this? And it's like, this is recorded. This is captured. You know what I mean? And like the contributions that you can make. I mean, if for no other reason, it's a reason enough to record your thoughts today, right? To go, man, this is for them. And it might be valuable to somebody today. It might be, worthwhile in that way. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I'm glad to know that you're putting more kind of on wax, so to speak. Like, you got your studio built now. Which,
yeah,
that's what's up. He was just telling me before we kicked this off that he's kind of built out a studio downstairs, and so that's a full-on sound booth studio.
Yeah, it's called the Inspiration Space, and
All
a
right.
lot of my kids are gonna like write and draw on the walls. Uh, Probably not the biggest wall because I'll like how you have all the books behind you. I'll probably use a plain wall as a backdrop, but I wanted them to be able to go in and express themselves. So we got studio speakers and all that kind of stuff in there to really allow them a space to create. So the Inspiration Space is for all of us, but I'll certainly be doing a lot of my creating there.
God, that's good, man. I'm curious. So you and I both sat in a session when we were back when we did the Amapico programming, and they did a session on flow state. I don't know if you remember much about it, but you're familiar with flow state, right, as a
Mhm.
phenomenon. And it's come up on here from time to time, talking with folks about it. But I was curious to ask you, um, now, like you're familiar enough with it to know like your own experience with it, like when you lose track of time, when you forget to go eat, when you like all of a sudden your pattern recognition increases. There's a couple vantage points because I go, man, like from the yoga side of things, the discipline side of things that you're working with there, but then also the working on the land. And I'm just curious, and there may be areas that I don't know to ask you about, but just like I feel like there's a lot to learn from that experience. I guess my own reflection on it is like it's a taste of eternal life. Like it's a way in which
Mm.
we that eternal now, that idea that like I lose track of time. It's like I'm completely present. Like you said, I think earlier, like and maybe it was on what you said on your podcast that I listened to before we even started talking, like I'm dedicated to being present, like in the now kind of thing. And it's like there's a gift of the flow state that brings us into that. And I think a lot of times it's also telling about our own relationship to the work that we're doing. There's something really rich and deep in that. And I'm just curious for you, like thinking about things you've been working on, whether it be digging out a garden or working on launching a platform or even just your own yoga discipline. Like, where are ways that you've seen yourself kind of engage, like fall into this flow state, like in just, I don't know, just kind of reflecting on that experience a little bit and maybe even just, yeah,
Yeah,
tell me about that.
yeah. I think it's a great question, and I appreciate bringing that up, getting in the zone, quote unquote.
Hmm.
And to your point again earlier, I look at the garden. Tilling the garden is the same as tilling someone's mind. So my role as a yoga instructor, I'm planting seeds, I'm creating space, I'm pulling weeds, and the more I do that for myself, then the more I'm able to like sit with another human being and do the same thing to allow space for that thing to blossom. So they're one. It's really all the same thing. And Sri Yukteswar says there is, and he says there is no yoga. Yoga is yoga, but really there. So he's saying there is no yoga. Yoga is yoga. It's really like a lifestyle. So before I was like hard on myself because, like I mentioned, my traps and my Romboys got so tight that I was like, quote unquote, a horrible yogi. I was like, oh man, I could barely touch my toes because I've been
Hmm.
doing so much work there. But I still, something else is taking over because where it used to be laborious for me to get up in the morning, now, man, my spirit wakes me up at 4, sits me down to meditate. And the thing that's funny about meditation is you can't meditate. Meditation comes to you. It is a flow state in and of itself, but you can't like seek it out because it goes further from you. So you have to allow it to come. So my body's saying, "Hey, get up." My mind, whatever, said, "Get up, sit here, and allow me." Just basically experience me. So that was happening. So then that's Raja Yoga, right? King Yoga, Yoga of the mind. All these classifications that we do as human beings. I'm starting to understand what Jesus, what everybody said. There is, Saint Paul praying without ceasing.
Hmm.
Right? What does that really mean? Well, that means living in flow each moment. So it happens like now. Like I'm not thinking about time. The only thing that reminds me of time is anime. My Ridgeback keeps walking by the window, and then when I see her, I'm like, oh yeah, she's been out there a while. I see her panting, and I'm like, man, she probably needs a drink. And then she goes back. But I'm, just really being absorbed in each moment. Uh, I guess fortunately, That could be a judgment. It's more often now. It's like with everything. Um, where I recognize it's not is I was more with my kids in the moment. Like they walk in the room, I was more like, boom, we entered that. So I've been catching myself being out of flow state, out of the moment when they come in because there's so much on my plate sometimes. And that's what happens. The minute you get out of the moment, that's what snaps me back in. When they come in like daddy and I'm not really paying attention to them, I'm like, yeah, yeah, just do that. And then they leave. I'm like, oh man, that sucked. That was a wonderful opportunity to engage, not just to lock eyes, but to really soak up that moment. And the only reason I didn't is because I was thinking like, I'm trying to get these shoes on to get out there while I still have sunlight, to get out there before this happens. Yeah. So the minute I'm not present, that sort of happens. So, thankfully I still have the awareness. Yeah, it's nothing I can do once it happens. I don't go run to them and apologize. I'm, it's in my mind like, okay, be more present, you know.
Your dog's name is Anime.
Yeah, like Japanese anime.
Do you need to let her in?
Yes.
Do that. That's cool.
Okay.
I got yeah.
2 seconds, let me let her.
Yeah, all good.
All right, I'm back. Thanks, man.
No, all good. You said the only thing that makes me recognize what time it is, I see Anime out there panting and probably thirsty. And I was like, yeah, let's go handle that, man. Let the animal stay thirsty. But I'll tell you what, it triggered a thought about what you were saying. So the idea, I won't be able to quote this. I want to say it's a psalm or something, but like, as a deer pants for water, so my soul pants for you. You know, the idea of like being thirsty.
Yeah.
And as you were talking, you a couple times now you've said about, I think about enlightenment. You're like, if I try to go after that thing, it's further from me. And then you said in meditation, you said you got to allow it to come, right? Like and at several points you brought up humility, which is another virtue that I think is kind of elusive in that way. It's like you can't get it by directly pursuing it,
Right.
And you have to, and so the idea of allowing something to come is and this relates to like what you talked about with patience, I guess before. I would love to hear you just, I don't know, it seems like a theme that's coming out, so I wanted to ask you to maybe directly address that or muse on that if we haven't completely already covered it. But I'm just curious, like, tell me about the posture. It sounds like there's like this posture of an open hand as opposed to a direct pursuit of these things that seem most important to you. And it's an odd thing to go, I have a goal that I aim at, but I also it has to come as a byproduct of another thing, right?
Right. You can't even have a goal at all. It's very tricky. Spirituality, I'm learning, at least for myself, is very tricky. The goal is not to have a goal, but then that goal is a goal. If you have a goal not to have a goal, that's a goal. So really it comes down to that praying without ceasing. Like you let go of everything. It's really just a surrender. That's what I think that St. Pauline thing is just a surrender to what is. And I didn't understand that when I first started to study, when they were like, oh, really, human beings create their own worlds in their mind and da da da. And I was like, that's bullshit. That's the way, I didn't understand it. But I do now. And that is just like I was talking about. If I have this expectation in my mind, like, oh, I got to get out and garden. Oh, I got to get food. Like, I like a lot of people. I'm not sure how we're going to pay the mortgage in the last couple of months. It depends on what the hell the powers that be. And then people get on me and like, well, they don't have power over me. And it's like, well, they kind of do. If they can order the military, unless you can turn yourself into a comet, you going down, police, state, military, whatever it is. So there is this sort of waiting, this realization that even if you go to Einstein's theory of relativity, right, and say we're all like energy, well, then you're still bound by infinity. You're bound by eternity. The fact that you can still be bound, even in freedom, is like, oh, well, then is that appealing? Like that's an existential argument. But then what are we really doing here? Like, why does it take a pandemic for people to wake up and realize their life has value?
Mm,
And why is that? Is that something we did to ourselves? Is that something people did to us? Like, the audacity of not understanding that, or the power of being able to look that in the face and just be like, "Oh, whatever." Like, or even the realization, because, like, to your point, humility, I kept using it, but I wasn't humble, and I didn't realize I wasn't humble until you catch yourself in humility, until you're like, "Oh, this is what," when you want to cry because your body hurts and some force is compelling you to do something. I'm not fighting Monsanto when I'm planting my stuff. I want to make sure that we're not homeless and hungry ever again. Like,
mm,
we were also food banking at that time. And
mhm,
I was still giving to everybody. I was still, shoot, I might have been an Amapico. I either just came out of that when I met you, or I may have still been in it. But the ability to be absorbed moment to moment, I didn't bring my homelessness and my debt and my life circumstances to places where I went. That's why when
mhm,
I talk about it now, people are like, "When? What?" And almost think it's like a story I'm making up, right? Or just like shrug their shoulders because they're like, I didn't bring it
mhm,
into spaces with me. It was something that I was dealing with, that I was manifesting based on my own energy, my own thoughts, my own, you know, being. And so the beingness of what we're experiencing, surrendering to it moment to moment, makes things last forever, I guess. And that is eternity. The eternity is in the moment.
mm. So as you talk about, well, let me tell you a little. There's a little exercise I've done with a group many times with groups of people related to, you mentioned like being free, freedom, and I think so. So get a group of people together, and I'll go, hey, okay, everybody sit around in a circle, close your eyes, and let's see if I can remember this. But basically, go. I'm gonna read. I'm gonna put someone around, almost like duck, duck, goose, tap you on the head, right? And I'm gonna go, okay, if you're say, I'm gonna try to say, I keep repeating this. I said, if you're tapped once, stand up and repeat after me. If you're tapped twice, oh man, I can't remember. If you're tapped twice, stay seated and keep your eyes closed. And if you're tapped 3 times, do whatever you want. And then I'll just keep repeating. If you're tapped once, stand up and repeat after me. If you're tapped twice, stay seated and keep your eyes closed. If you're tapped 3 times, do whatever you want. And you repeat that over and over as someone goes around the room and taps people. And then obviously enough people get tapped once, it gets a little chaotic. Like people are trying to repeat after you, and you just keep repeating the script over and over, and it's a little chaotic. Some people are seated with their eyes closed, and then some are tapped 3 times. They're set free from the parameters of the exercise. And now I'm sharing this, and people might hear it and do it. I might be in one of my groups the next time I do this, so I might have spoiled it for myself. But like
Mm.
the what'll happen is I'll reflect on it. Like when then you just kill the game and go, okay, let's talk about it. Like what was that like for you? People like it was really hard to hear what was going on or to repeat after you, or like it was chaotic. But like who was tapped 3 times? And what did you do? And they're like, I made fun of people, or I went and got a drink, or I went to the bathroom, or I didn't do anything, or I checked my phone, whatever. And then the follow up question for that is like, well, why didn't you tap other people 3 times? Like, why wouldn't you use your freedom to set people free? Now, nobody thinks of that, right? Like, well, you didn't say that. It wasn't an option. It wasn't, I didn't know that I could meddle with the game, but it gives a great opportunity to talk about the connection. Well, the question of how we use our freedom, where we do have it, where you have some choice to make, you have some autonomy. And I guess in some sense, the connection, and this all telling you that just to kind of come around to the connection of, and what I love about your own story, like even going like, I'm not railing against Monsanto, I'm fighting against my own food insecurity or whatever, or I'm trying to make sure that I don't go hungry. But at the same time, this is like a real kind of activism in a way. Like it's like, yeah, it's not maybe global political, but it's local and specific. And I guess the connection for me is between freedom and responsibility. It's like in
Mm.
every way that we're free, we're responsible. Like, are your hands free? Then what are you doing with them? do you have finances? Well, what are you doing with it? Right? Like there's accountability and responsibility that comes with those things. And I guess to me, one to say like, man, I super admire it's like you're like, I don't see these things as these big global things, but like they are connected. Like it is deeply spiritual. It is out of like some deep why I'm doing these things, for my own connectedness to creation and the earth and love for my family and provision, but also like there are broken systems in the world. Like where you talk about people not being free and police state and this, and I'm like, I think there's no greater vulnerability than the fact that we rely on trucks driving in food to our grocery stores in the cities. I'm like, stop doing that, and the cost of a tomato is going to be bloodshed. Like, you think it's bad with the toilet paper? Like, let food stop getting delivered. You know what I mean? There's nothing greater. And I'm like, there is, in some sense, I'm like, we have to figure out how to produce food. And why I actually equate food as power. Like, if you're growing food, you're more powerful than you are. You have 12 more eggs power than you had yesterday, or whatever. Like legitimate power. And therefore freedom and responsibility with those things. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if that like stirs a thought for you to share, but also just to say, like, to point at what I hear and what you're saying is like, you're kind of speaking around the concept of freedom. And I just see in you like a modeling of taking personal responsibility, like at home, going, man, my kids, my yard, my life, my neighbors, right? And it's like, yeah, we might not see eye to eye on everything, but they're my neighbors. I'm going to love them. I'm going to learn. I'm going to be open. I'm going to be caring. And I just want to honor that and thank you for that model. I just think it's exactly right. It's so easy for us to go, this is what's wrong in the world. This is what's wrong in the world. This is what's wrong in the world. But it's hard to go, yeah, but what about your household? What about your bank account? What about your life? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you doing? Right? Expecting like the government to change things or the systems to change. They change because we play a part in those things, right? And if enough people do what you're doing, that would create lasting change. And at the very least, you're doing it, and it'll create lasting change in your household and your family, maybe your community, which is an incredible way to invest yourself in the generations to come, in the things that will follow after you, and then recording those things along the way. Which one of the other things you mentioned, you said another thing is when my kids run in and I'm focused on getting this thing done or getting that thing done, and they want my attention, right? And I think this is another piece of the example, and I wanted to ask you about it because I haven't read your book, but like you were like, you have a book, Affirmations for Dad, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Affirmations for Dads. Yeah.
And I actually think like I can almost anticipate what is there without having read it, but I am just deeply curious. Like, talk to me about that. You're a dad. That's a major part of your own bio and who you are and who you define yourself as. It seems like you're super intentional about it, all the way to the point of having developed some 21 affirmations around this topic. So I for those listening, and then just for me, just like share about that a little bit and maybe what role that plays in this bigger conversation. But yeah, just tell me about the book and the process of having written that.
Shoot, before I go there, you mentioned
Sure.
some really powerful stuff, man, and like I have chills because it's no greater. I don't know. It's just gratitude for being seen. Like I think you see me, like at my most vulnerable state, like that. The little kid, I feel like adults where we become adults to really fight for the kid that never got a chance to speak up or live out loud, or that child inside of us. So you really honor my existence on the planet by saying some of the things you just said, and that was just a very touching thing. And even just now you're saying I probably already guess what's in the book, because yeah, 'cause you get it, you get
Yeah.
what it is I'm doing, and even to understand that freedom has a cost, freedom has a responsibility. I mean, ask Harriet Tubman, ask and she wasn't alone. Like at Buddha's story is that there's the story about Buddha is that when he became a light and the gates of heaven opened up to him, and he was allowed instant passage, and he stopped at the gate and asked. He's like, "Well, what about my fellow humans?" And they were like, "Well, they will have to suffer until they too become enlightened." And he was
Figure it
like,
out.
"Yeah." He was like, "Well, what's the point of that?" He's like, "I will not pass through the gate until they come, and then that's why the gates of heaven are open. That's why we
Mm,
still have a chance, an opportunity to get out." And that's similar to the Bible's purgatory. Like, you're in purgatory until karma yoga, until you burn off these sins. And so there, to me, and I think it's not for everybody. So again, there's that non-judgment. Like, everybody can't be Harriet Tubman. um, but if everybody was, I wouldn't. That would be interesting. And it wasn't just Harriet. Remember, there was an underground railroad, so there were oodles and noodles of white folks, so-called classified white folks that helped that happen, and many other black folks that helped that happen to get to this passage of freedom. She was just a highlight. So if I'm a highlight, if I'm a little asterisk, then so be it. I could wear that. But really, it just comes down to all these other people that were out here doing it way before I was.
mm-hmm.
My neighbor who I just met because of this pandemic, just met him 3 days ago. Uh, his name is Norris. By any other opportunity, Norris sounds like he's from Texas, looks like he's from Texas. He's a really great guy. Would I have met these people if they weren't doing their own thing? And then lastly, to the culture here that I wanted to touch on, something you spoke about before I get into the book,
Yep.
is that I realized myself, and again, the realization came to me. I wasn't thinking about it. It's just like you. Like, my family grew when they were a little younger. The second youngest now is 11, and they go down to the age of 5. We ate 12 eggs for breakfast. Like, when you scramble eggs with this family, it's a whole dozen.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they're a little older, it's a baker's dozen. It's like, it's got to be, well, maybe not 18, but at least 14, 15 eggs. So I was like, man, I can't. How are we gonna have scrambled eggs? You know, needing that amount. But it wasn't until it's relatively quiet here. Not relatively, it's very quiet here. It's farmland. But once all of this COVID stuff started coming down the pike, man, I could hear the AR-15s.
Mm.
I mean, right up on the farm, up the road in that direction, just multiple buddies practicing for the impending Armageddon. Like,
Yep.
out there gardening. I'm
It's a
out
lot
there
of
gardening, and you hear,
preppers and shit. Yeah.
yeah. And I started thinking, like, damn, like the amount of, you hear the semi-automatic handguns. And I'm like, what are they practicing for? As I ran into
Mm.
the wrestling coach at the Bauman's here, and was just like, hey, what's going on? And like, oh yeah, you should hear my neighborhood. And he was like, only people stopped a little bit because ammo cost so much. And I was like, that's when I realized, like, oh yeah, when shit hits the fan. Because when I'm in the local grocery store, there are no eggs on the shelf, and I was thinking, oh, I should sell eggs in this market. This would be great way to start getting awareness. And then I was like, oh no, this is a way to get jacked. This is
Yeah.
a way
Yeah.
to, like, once people know, of course they'll start at first, like, here's $4, here's $5. But as we saw people fighting over toilet paper, they will come in and steal your hens. First, it might be eggs. Then I'd be like, nah, yo, let's just take these hens. And that's where the Northeast Baltimore boy in me wakes up like, oh, wait, humanity's still the same. We will
Yeah.
still care for ourselves over the next person if given the opportunity.
Mm.
And I still haven't gone out and bought semi-automatic rifles or anything, but it is part of the culture here. Uh, I don't know if it's fear or preparation. I haven't decided that yet. But it's a real aspect that, like, yeah, man, we have protein sources here. We got
Mm.
hens and goats, and people eat rabbits. Like, we have, like, survival tools here. So there is a power in it. And I am aware of that. And you mentioned that, and I wasn't aware of it. And that is how awareness is. It reveals itself. It was just matter of fact to me, but on a larger scale, I have to now be aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's actually, I forget the name of this. I want to say it's in Detroit. And actually referencing before, man, this sucks that I didn't look this up or remember the name of the guy. There's a dude that runs a kind of an urban farming collective in, I want to say Detroit, could be wrong about where it is, called Growing Power.
Mm.
And it's a mostly African American Black community that he works with. That he and one of the when I referenced earlier, like there was a lot of challenges to, like, I remember hearing him talk about, like, I couldn't get Black people to come into the garden with me because of all of the legacy of slavery and the thoughts around that. He's like, but like part of the thing that I'm trying to convince people of is that this is a tool of self-determination. Like, we are so dependent for sustenance,
Mhm.
that we don't have power. Like, we are without power, and
Mhm.
every tomato we grow, every head of lettuce or collard greens that we grow, we're that much more powerful to determine our own way, or self-determination. And connecting that here, I'm like, man, I just think, like, I just think it's so obvious, man. Like, it's even a war tactic, like, if you go to war against a people, you cut off food supply.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, that's probably a war crime, but it's a tactic historically. It's like,
Yeah.
you can't eat, you're coming out, right? Like, that's just the way that goes. And the reality is, you're probably right. If it really, really, I remember somebody telling me that when we were raising all the food at our own property, and we share with our neighbors, and we run these, like, even now we have some community gardens, and we take the food and we put them in our free market food pantry, and we distribute groceries and we share them. And but we're also not in, like, tremendous need for the food. We're just happy to be able to grow it, grow a few things, do whatever. But I remember a buddy telling me, like, kind of like maybe in more of the spirit of the people with the AR-15s, going, yeah, but when it really goes down, if you ain't standing in that garden with some ammo, you won't have it, right? Like,
And think of how sad that is, John. Think of the desperation of the human experience where, like, if the roles were reversed and that was you, wouldn't it be smarter for me, especially with my family? And this is what I try to impart because I work with kids that are on the box a lot, like with DJS in the juvenile system.
Mhm.
I go to the youth prisons and talk. Think of this. It's stupid. The stupidity of me to say, "Well, I gotta feed my family, so I'm gonna run up on John and take this." Oh, he think he gonna defend this? Well, I'm gonna get my hammer and I'm gonna come harder.
Mhm.
Think of the stupidity of that short term thinking, and it is stupid. I'm not calling it and trying to label anybody, but think of the intelligence of, yeah, and nobody's gonna starve. They won't starve to death if I come to you and say, "Hey, can you teach me how to grow? I
Mhm.
see you have this big farm, and also I know you have a big family here, but can y'all give me even the table scraps to
Mhm.
feed these folks while you are teaching me how to grow? And we can help out in any way. So maybe you can grow it." Like, look at the community. When we think in terms of community and supporting one another,
Mhm.
like you said, that is the biggest revolution of all. And that's when you got to think, some of the conspiracy theorists may have some truth in there, which is the only thing keeping us there is not there is a mindset
That's right.
of not being in community, because it's
Connectivity.
smarter. Like, you could put down your AR-15s, bro. Like, whatever it is you think I'm coming for, I might be coming for it, but it's out of need. So don't kill me.
Mm.
And then if for the people that are coming out of need, don't get desperate. So where you think you have to kill, come with humility. Hey man, I'm coming here because I saw you have dairy farm. You got cows. We haven't eaten in a month, but the programming that we get on TV, all of these zombie like movies or
Yeah.
these things that
Yeah.
postulate like in the end of days you need to do this, need to be prepared. That's just someone else's idea. But when you get into your own intelligence, man, if somebody I just complained about the level of work I have to do.
Mm.
So shit hits the fan. Why would you come here and steal my chickens when, man, I have brooding hens, man. We eat their eggs before they hatch, but they can hatch us a bunch of new chickens in a couple of
Mhm.
weeks. They're
Mhm.
gonna lay at least a single egg every day for the next 8 years of their life. So that's at having 18. So we can exponentially get those, and they start laying at 6 months. So yes, we just have to figure out for you, sir or ma'am, whoever would come, even if it was the whole community. Now we still have more land. Now we can work together more as a team, like rabbits. That new rabbit, we introduced her here, and a week she got pregnant. And they take 28 days to give birth. So again, protein source, she's gonna probably have 14 babies. Like, all right, so you don't want to eat a rabbit. Well, we got more green fertilization. It's just the mindset of looking at one another as opposition, as enemy, instead of as asset and friend. It just, I mean, it blows my mind how we don't see the obvious.
So and the idea, I think you're exactly right. And I think it has a lot to do with the mindset, right? So like you go, and this goes back to some of what you were talking about, the idea of permaculture and not wasting, because there is a way in which we've almost been inoculated to think there's not enough, the scarcity mindset, as opposed to like going, I don't know, an asset mindset, which is one like you even something like you said, well, I have all these opportunities for gratitude. Gratitude seems to overlap tremendously with assets to me. I'm like, I'm great. Like, no matter what circumstance we're in, I'm just like, there's something to be grateful for. Are you still breathing? Are you still able-bodied? Can you still stand up? Can you still think clearly? Is there another human being in your life? Like, there's all of these, and this is like for community development. This is the approach, the proper approach to take to community development, is asset mapping. To go, let's look around. What do we have? What are we good at? Like, what is in our hands now that we can build with, right? And these are things that I do with folks all the time that are in really desperate situations. Be like, a lot of what is stopping you is a mental barrier, right? Like, you are free to sell these water bottles, right? Like there's a million things you could do that if you would do, right? Like just if we don't have some, it has to look this way or it has to look that way. And I'm just curious, like, I don't know, like in some sense, like I don't know, how do we train ourselves? Because this is the thing that I think is like, it's not, I don't want to say, well, you're either that way or you're not, right? Like, you have eyes to see or you don't. And I think this is part of your own life, is helping people to discipline themselves into a state of mind, a state of being, a way of being. And it's like, and I've really thought a lot about, like, we can train ourselves to see a certain way, to look for these opportunities, to like, and I'm just curious if you've got thoughts about like, how do we, and maybe even how do we use this current moment for that, but like, how do we in general like give ourselves eyes to see the assets that are around us, to see one another as collaborators, right? Rather than to go, it's a zero sum game, there's only so much, you better kill or get yours, you know what I mean? Like the what what can help move the needle for us, like individually, culturally, communally?
I don't know. I mean, I mean, literally, when I'm, I can use the kids in the juvenile
Mm-hmm.
justice, conundrum
Mm-hmm.
as a better example, because it's more of a hyperbolic example. It's so
Yep,
like,
yep.
so when I do, I sort of play chess, mental chess, and get them in that checkmate of like, well, why can't you just do that? Why would you rob person around the corner for that money? Why not? I did that. The guy on my block in the greatest recession, when everything crashed, because we went through a recession greater than when people were jumping out of the buildings on Wall Street. He had bought his second and third Hummer. I was like, why do you need three Hummers? And what the hell is that? And so I pulled up on him and said, hey man, can you teach me whatever it is you're doing? He said, oh, I don't know nothing, man. I just dibble dabble here and there. I was like, what the hell does that mean? Like, I'm asking you to teach me how to fish and not give me a fish. I don't do it. So it hurt my feelings a lot. This is somebody I knew from when I was 5, I guess,
Hmm.
to now. And so when I get folks in that mental state, they either feel like, yeah, no one's going to help me, or I just don't know. I think, the real answer is, what I believe and feel is that we have to help one another cultivate that awareness.
Hmm.
Um, if we don't have that awareness cultivated, it goes back to that aphorism I was saying from yoga, which is ignorance is is the cause of all human suffering. I truly believe that. And I'll give another example of like, just mentorship helps. When I was creating the studio, I didn't know about how to mud, how to use the mud. I thought I did because my uncle taught me when I was younger, but he was a mason. He don't know shit about drywall. So
Hmm.
I didn't know until my father-in-law, who was a carpenter, he showed me everything I was doing wrong. And so then I had this lesson of how to mud and then how to push out the bubbles. And then even after all this laborious work I did, sanding, I had to sand way too much because I put too much on there. But then I don't know if you know about wet sanding. Wet sanding was how I finished it. I was like, what's wet sanding? He showed me.
Mm,
Dipped a cloth in a bucket of water, and you use that wet piece, and you can sand out all the imperfections the same way you were using a dry sander,
mm,
and it's even more effective. Now it's a lot of finesse. You have to have the proper tension and stroke, and it finishes hard and perfect. And I was like, man, I was blown away because again, that's how life is.
mm,
So I'm learning that now with planting. Like when you plant a seed, yeah, you can read the directions on the back of the seed packet, but what our ancestors used to do is put the seed in their mouth, hold it around for 2 minutes, that germinates, and you bond with the plant. You hold
mm,
that seed under your tongue. Your saliva is now your DNA mixes with the DNA of that plant. You stick that in the ground
mm.
and watch how that grows. So it's just so many levels to learning in our culture, the Western culture. We don't uh, value older folks. I mean, there's so many things that we can get from people who have had this lived experience. So I guess the short way, I know answered immediately to your question. I said, I don't know, but I think it's just cultivating awareness. And then again, that word being humble to know that even in your awareness, there's still new levels. Just when you think you've become the perfect mudder and know how to sand, there's wet sanding. And who I don't know what's after wet sanding. That's probably someone listening says, "Oh, if he loves wet sanding, he
Yep.
would love, blankety blank." And that's why keeping childlike curiosity, being aware that the more knowledge I get, I know I don't have any knowledge at all. Like it's so much deeper knowledge to go after to a point where you start to get wisdom. You just say, "Oh, I can put all books away. Every book that's ever been written is already in me. It's literally in me. It can be awakened by an experience,
Mm,
whether that's putting together a bike. I mean, just gears. I mean, gears are incredible.
mhm.
My new favorite show is Homestead Rescue. I watch Marty Rainey and his kids. Homestead Rescue,
I haven't
man.
seen it.
Oh my gosh, you'll binge watch it. How this man he goes and off gridders, homesteaders. He will make an a hydroelectric plant, like source out of like an old bike in your nearby creek, and
Wow.
people get power in the Smoky Mountains, like that have been living on land that's the soil is dead, and I don't know. He's just a real compassionate person, or at least the show is crafted to make him that way. I don't want to get too big
Sure.
into the fanaticism, but they come across modern day Jesus, man. It's just really coming by and teaching people how to do for themselves, and that's all I'm doing. I believe that's what you are doing,
Mhm.
and that is what I appreciate about your work. And while I was happy to have this lengthy. It's not even long enough. I was happy when you said 2 hours. I was like, man, I talked to you for sun
Yeah,
going down.
yeah, we could definitely do that. We could do that. But it's good to have it's good for listeners and for us to have a
Absolutely. Yeah.
budgeted amount of space.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. To your point, freedom is not chaos, to that example that you did.
Before we run out of that budgeted space, I do want you to circle back and actually tell those that are listening about affirmations for dads.
Yeah. Yeah. I did take it on my notes in front of me. I was like, when are we going to have that natural segue? So no natural segue, just back. So affirmations for dads. I learned a lot about myself becoming a father, and some of the lessons and I'm still learning, obviously, but just some of the more early lessons. I just wanted to share my testimony with and give people a focal point. It's not just for men, even though it says affirmations for dads. You would think it's genderized for the male perspective, but just things I noticed. I remember, I don't know if I actually saw her on Oprah or something, but Toni Morrison, a quote that she said, the greatest thing you could do for a child is to light up when they enter a room.
Mm,
And that stuck with me for forever. And I was like, wow. I get it because yeah, if you come into a room and somebody's face frowns or God forbid you even just be like, oh, what do you want now, John? You know, that sets them up. What are they gonna feel about their life for the rest of their life just from that? So it building off that one statement that I overheard or witnessed her doing, I had several things that I wanted to put into affirmations for dads. And affirmations are just a way to help concentrate and focus. I don't necessarily believe in them as, like mantras because that takes your focus off of the moment, which is always unraveling in various different ways. However, I was once in a state where I needed affirmations too. My mind was that busy, that active. So they're not pointless.
Mm.
Um, they're very useful. So because I use them to get out of one state of darkness and continuing to just look more and more for a brighter light. That's what it's about.
Now, where can people find that book?
It's on Amazon. It's also I have a bunch here in my basement, so I would like to sell them. I'll be happy to ship them out.
Okay.
So they're on www.changabell.com.
Mm-hmm.
When you come up, my wife designs all the websites, so it's like the biggest thing. Go to changabell.com. It's the first thing you see. Book. Amazon, I think the last time I checked there, it said temporarily out of stock or whatever, but people were didn't even have them in their presence, and I saw it on there for like $41.
Hmm.
I sell them for $19.99, so I don't know how Amazon really works. Where they were some of them were on sale for $41. That wasn't me, so I think people might think I'm out there price gouging. But yeah,
Your wife did your website?
she does all our websites. I think at one point we have 4 up. I think now there are 2 active sites up.
So yours and
So BMYI, so the Black Male Yoga Initiative, BMYI.org. She did that, and she did Changa Bell. We had the Relationship Experience, which was my radio show. Um, Now I'm just doing it through Anchor and Changa
mm-hmm.
Bell. And it was Sunlight and Yoga, my for-profit company. Actually, Sunlight's is still up, so there's 3 up. So I think Sunlight and Yoga is active, even though I don't have a brick and mortar building anymore. Um, it's still active. So changabell.com, sunlightandyoga.com, and bmyi.org.
Does she do that for hire? Because they're quite good.
Oh, thanks, man. No, so her strengths, I don't know why she can do design, but she can. She does that really well. And again, I don't know, if I were to do a hypothetical comparison, maybe I read 1,000 books. She's read like 150. She's a far better writer. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, she's just a gifted writer. So she can write well and she can design well. She just came with those gifts. So thank you, and I'll make sure I pass that on to her and let her know. But she's really good.
Gifted creator. Well, I'll tell you what, since you're rattling off some websites and stuff, and I know you have another meeting to jump on in the near future. Just for those listening, what other places do you want to point people, maybe asks you have for people or challenges for those that are listening? Just, I want to give you some space just to kind of
Yeah,
put out whatever you would like. Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. So like you mentioned, I'm active, very active on Instagram. Feel like I just want to allow a certain level of transparency that hopefully inspires folks. So Instagram at Changabell, the Changabell website. I would love if folks would sign up for the newsletter on bmyi.org or Changabell because I'm become increasingly more active there. Now that we're doing a lot more online things like the podcast. So, and once we do get back to a level of quote unquote normalcy, I travel the country a lot. So I'd like to go to visit people in their cities, maybe speak. So yeah, just changabell.com. Twitter, I'm not as active there, even though I have some kind of presence there. I don't know who can sit around and use their thumbs all day and be in that conversation because I'm out toiling in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wish I could, but I'm out there doing that. But the most, um, I guess, easily accessible place to get me is Instagram, direct messaging, and through either the Black Male Yoga Initiative website or Changa website.
Well, man, and just appreciative of all the work you guys have been doing, and like maybe have my own version of a request for you. Do you have a video camera laying around the house somewhere?
Oh, you know that was what I did for 22 years. Film is my original calling. Yes, I do.
I thought I heard that somewhere. As you guys are doing all this work, man, I see snapshots of the what'd you call it, the chicken condo,
Yeah,
being built out there, and some of the work you guys have been doing. And I tell you what, like start set up a tripod, dude. Like no joke, like the work you guys are doing there.
yeah,
Document the hell out of it, man. Like take all the pictures you can. I know you are taking photographs as things develop, but like for those of us watching along, it's super rich and powerful. And I think there's so much in what you're doing, homesteading and permaculture, that it is both a manifestation of all the kind of values that you carry as a human being and as a leader, but like it's so concrete and so applicable at home with your food, your relationship with the land. It's something that I just think, man, I've been so excited to watch that as you do it. And the more that can be made available that way, I'm like, I don't know, here's a time lapse of a day of all morning's work of putting that garden in. Like just
yeah.
put it to some music and upload it, man. I mean, no joke, I would be very intrigued to kind of watch along, and I think others would as well. It's just you're doing some really valuable stuff, and like you have the rich experience of doing it. But if you had like if just some of it was just caught on film along the way, I know it's be very valuable to share, and I know I'd be eager to watch it. So you might want to dig out one of the cameras and
No, I appreciate it. So I've been urging my wife to do it, to do a YouTube channel and have her and the kids do it, because so much of this, I need a deeper level of compassion, because I
Mhm.
appreciate that request, but so much of it is so challenging for me already as I'm learning and in pain and out there wincing. Sort of the last thing I want to be doing is even setting that tripod. But I know I
Mhm.
do want to do it, because we were setting up to have people visit, like with homeschool networks.
Yeah.
But then when COVID came around, we were like, oh, well, now we had to cancel. Like literally, it was a school set to come out a week and a half right before that happened. So what I've been saying to her is we could do the same thing, but virtual tours.
Mhm.
So there maybe we lost the monetization aspect of it now, because the school was going to pay, we're going to feed them, but again, there's the compassion versus the bottom line.
Let it come, man. It'll come.
Exactly, right,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
So I said, well, let's just lose the monetary thing and let's just do virtual tours. And so I have been thinking about doing that. And I want to do it as a work in progress, but I'm the worker. So
Mhm.
that was that community part where, someone in the family has to step up. So I'm gonna put a foot on somebody's pedal, try to get them to really do it. I did arm my kids. That's what they got. Two of them got video cameras for Christmas this year,
Nice, nice,
with
nice,
the hope
nice.
that they would be like, "Hey, Dad, let me shoot this." So, yeah, like
That'd
like
be
I was
awesome.
telling you, I'm looking out the window now, looking at my 8-year-old play with the neighbor that I was telling you about,
Love it.
and they catch frogs all day, and part of it too is I appreciate that coming from you, because it feels narcissistic at times to be like, oh yeah, let me show people my life, but it's not that. It's just that I'm so present and appreciative in the moment. I just want to share the gratitude, because so many people inspired me that same way when I wasn't here living in this manner, that I would tune in and YouTube and still do watch so many different people raising their duck farms and permaculture. So I do need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspiring, it's informative, and if for nothing else, that seventh generation out is gonna be grateful that you put that stuff on wax. And like honestly, just to take a little bit of your excuse away, man, you got a phone in your pocket, it's got a camera on it, and when you walk that dog in the morning, you could just pull that thing out and go, "Yo, I'm about to walk the dog. Let me just show you guys what we're
Yeah,
doing
you're
right
right.
here."
You're
You know what
right.
I'm saying? Like, just do it.
Live. You saying
Just
do it
do it.
live?
I don't care if it's live or not. You could do it live. You could do it, just record it on your phone or whatever. But like, yeah, live's easier. Screw editing, man. Just go walking around. And then if someone else steps up, goes, I can do a better job. Go, that'd be great. You should do a better job.
Right. Come on out.
Post-production on it. Do some actual work. Yeah, that'd be great. Engage the rest of the family. Well, listen, man, I know you got another meeting to get on. I so appreciate your time. You and I got to make more of a routine of catching up, man. So I'm grateful you made some time. Grateful for whatever circumstances brought us together to talk today. And man, just thank you so much. And yeah, appreciate you, dude.
Yeah, I love you, brother. And thank you. It's an honor. Thank you for having me on your show. I've been watching from a distance, so it's nice to be a part of it. So I'm honored to be a part of that.
That's what's up.
So Changa and I stayed on the line for a little bit and chatted for a few more minutes. And he made a few other comments that I really wanted to include. So I chopped a section of that to share here at the end.
There's so many different aspects. You and I didn't even touch on marriage and like I have a co-partner in all of this and how we keep an atmosphere of love through like when we tell the kids about being poor, they don't even remember that. You know, there was no violence in the house. There was no alcoholism. We didn't lose our shit. But there was plenty of anxiety, panic attacks, plenty of visits to the ER room. What's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with you, sir. You're a picture of perfect health. And why am I dying? You know, they're like, you're not dying. You know, it's the stress of being homeless and broke, bruh.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah. So I appreciate you saying that. But I was rich before. You know, and that was the thing. I knew that. And I always used to say that to my wife, like, yo, we're rich. You know, because we have love, like there is nothing else. And so these are just sort of outcomes of that love that we kept focusing on no matter what. So the richness is a love, because this all go away tomorrow. I guarantee you we'll still be doing the same thing.
Well, and it's funny even going on to that, because like when I say rich, I actually don't mean anything economic. However, it obviously overlaps because you have the opportunity of land and this and that. But like the expression of these values, the building of a loving home, the intentionality around your family and whatever land you have access to.
Exactly.
I'm like, it's incredible, man. And it really is like, I'm like, yo, it comes back to this action oriented. I mean, I'm just like, I'm blown away by the modeling of an action oriented belief system where it's like, look, I can say I believe all these things, but ultimately, do I get up at 4 a.m. and do I go out in the yard?
Yeah.
Do I sit with the kids or do I not? It's like, you could say you love your kids, or you could say you like value certain things or against certain things in the world, but like audit the time you spent your day on, how you spent your day, and like that's how you're going to really figure it out. And which I think this COVID-19 time is like really exposing us, like how much impact has it had? How much has your life changed? How are you actually acting right now? That's the apocalypse, the unveiling of everything that's happening. It's like, that's what's happening. But and for you guys, you're like, yeah, we've been doing this. We're going to keep doing this. And I'm just like, yo, it's so good.
That's the thing that gets a little disheartening sometimes is that, you know, we're getting the recognition now because we're in a capitalistic society that now like, oh, hey, look, hey, I think so. What he was talking about is real. And we're like, well, we used to film and upload every night, every day after we ate, we would go do a dance party. So we literally eat at the dinner table, and then I always had Sonos. So I turned on the music system. And this is when we were living as a family of 8 in 1,200 square feet, a 2-bedroom colonial. So if you do the math, all 6 of my kids were in one room. And we were in the other, and we had the only other room up on that top floor was a tiny bathroom the size of a closet. And we lived with so much vitality. In that same little tiny building, my daughter fell down all 17 steps. She had a seizure. Blood all over the walls. My little 11-year-old was 7 at the time, and she was deeply depressed because she thought it was her fault because she couldn't catch her gigantic 16-year-old sister, and she seized at the top of the steps. And coming home and just seeing it looked like a murder scene because she had hit her head on the ceiling, the wall, all this kind of stuff. But we still shared our dance after, you know, that evening. We should. So not getting the recognition for the love or the not the recognition, the envy for the
Mm-hmm.
love then in the humble circumstances is a little frustrating. But what you're seeing now is the marketing, because
Mm.
I'm marketing because that's where I told you this sort of there's a there's no longer a struggle inside. I'm not trying to be Joel Osteen, but how I look at like TD
That's
Jakes for
good. That's
Joel
good.
Osteen. You know what I mean? Like TD Jakes, Joel Osteen, like how do y'all do it? Like how do you sort of prey on
Yeah.
humans' need for this sovereignty and monetize it? So it's not that, but it is the marketing like, okay, well, it's a homestead. This is what homesteads do. We gotta make money. And
Mm-hmm.
so the matter of factness, like my neighbor has 1,000 acres. He farms CBD and soy,
Wow.
but he's the hardest working man I've ever seen. He's a firefighter, and he also has a trucking company.
Mm.
So he's driving his trucks, his rigs, but 1,000 acres. So anybody that but he's not doing what I'm doing because he's not, he does other things. So I'm marketing. If I had 1,000, I'd be marketing the shit out of that too. I'd have a drone up showing the land,
Yeah.
talking about my CBD mass production, all of that. So it's the end of the day is business. But what you and I have to do as settle human beings is take, although we're commodifying what we do, take that thirst for the commodification out and just be like, bro, you have that
Mm.
there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do this. The only way you're going to get to any quote unquote upper level is to practice at this level. You can't be nice in Pop Warner and go to the NFL. You'll be killed. Literally cutting across the middle. One tackle is going to kill you. So if you don't want to play at that first level, you're never, ever, ever. There's been nobody that just played professional football, no matter how big and athletic, would just walked onto the field and walked on. Like
That's
even if
so
they are
good.
so-called walk-on, they've been prepping
Mm-hmm.
their whole life. Like Kurt Warner, they always say, "Oh, he was bagging groceries." Yeah, but he was preparing for that moment his entire life. His job happened to be at a grocery store, but he was ready to go into pros because he had been lifting, working out, training. He'd been doing that his whole life. So without the preparation, there is no elevation. It's that
Yep.
simple.